Are you curious about the unknown, the unexplainable? Do you find yourself intrigued by the mysterious and paranormal side of our world? Join us on an adventure into the world of inexplicable discoveries and investigations that may someday give us the final answer as to what may be behind the veil of reality. The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
On this episode of Let's Find Out, our guest delves into the mysteries surrounding vampires. He brings forth a captivating blend of scientific inquiry and personal insights. In his latest work, Vampires, Dead or Alive, he examines the origins, biology, and societal role of these beings through a lens of theoretical science. Are vampires a result of genetic mutation, or do they have extraterrestrial connections? All this plus more. Please welcome a new friend to our show, author and paranormal investigator Keith Evans. Keith, my friend, welcome to Let's Find Out. I'm happy to have you here today.
Well, thanks for having me.
For the last few weeks, month or so, we've been keeping in contact on Instagram and getting ready for this show, and you just released your new book, Vampires, Dead or Alive. Yeah, actually, this will be, the show's going into its third year. This will be the first ever vampire episode we've ever had. So
Cool.
I'm looking forward to this.
That's
And
good.
looking to learn more. Yeah, because mostly, unless you're really into vampire stuff, whatever people know about this subject usually comes from Hollywood or television, which is all pretty
Right.
much trash anyway. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, the real deal vampire, from folklore to the science of it. But before we begin, my friend, you began your journey as a paranormal investigator. Well, when did this part of your life begin?
Well, it began very early. I'm a slight empath, and as a child, I used to go to a relative's home that they had built around 1850, and they had this beautiful decorative wood. I think it's called wainscoting, and I used to look at it, and it would make me happy. And that was actually, I didn't know it at the time, but that was my empathic abilities. I was feeling the emotions of my past relatives who that wainscoting was the pride and honor of their house, and they were very proud of it. And it probably was very expensive wood to purchase at the time. But it's a type of wood where you see the wooden grain, and it has like a very glossy finish on it. So my parents thought that was kind of strange that I, you know, was taking interest in certain areas of the house that had nice design to it. So it didn't go over well with them when they found out that I, was trying to communicate with ghosts and spirits. They thought I was a little bit off, and probably some of them, if they're still alive, think the same thing today. But anyway, you can't change all people. You just have to be yourself. But I always enjoyed the paranormal. I was exposed to it in a way that I was young. I wasn't afraid of it. I was never, caused to be afraid of it. Never intended for me to fear the paranormal. The ghosts and spirits kind of brought it to me in a way that I didn't even know that ghosts and spirits were communicating with me. I was, in fact, my grandfather died in an auto accident when I was 13. And I was talking to him one day before he passed away. And I was telling him about one of my aunts had come up to my house and in the morning and had taken me to a train wreck that had just happened. And he said, train wreck that had just happened. He was like all concerned, like about, and I told him, I said, yeah, this was when I was like 4 years old, probably 1962. And he said, well, tell me about this. And I said, well, my mother used to get up late. She didn't get up until about 10 or 11. And I used to wake up around 8 a.m. And when I woke up, I was always hungry and wanted to get up, but I had to stay in bed because that was one of my mother's rules. Couldn't get up until she got up. So anyway, one morning, it was either my Aunt Virgie or my Aunt Ada. I couldn't tell because it looked like a combination of both. They walked into my room and asked me if I wanted to go see the train wreck. And I said, yeah, but I said, Mom, you'll get mad if I leave before she wakes up. So my aunt, which one, I don't know whether it was Aunt Virgie or Aunt Ada, explained to me that we'll be up there and back and she'll never know it. I said, okay, let's go. So we walked up to the little town called Woodbine. It's probably a quarter of a mile from my house. And I got to see the train wreck. And that was so interesting. The train had fallen over on its side. It was mainly coal cars and maybe some box cars. And they were like, they had fallen over on the side of the railroad track and into a shed that was used for canning factory. It was a shed that had equipment to husk corn on the cob. So I got to see that, and then her and I walked back before my mother woke up, and I was happy. And I told my grandfather, I never told anyone about it until now. And he said, so this lady didn't look like Aunt Virgie or didn't look like Aunt Ada. I said, no, it was a combination of both. And I said, that's what's so unusual, because they were still alive when I was 13. And I was telling my grandfather, because they were my grandfather's aunts, and they were sisters to my grandfather's mother, who passed away when he was like 8 years old. So he said that would have been my mother if it's a cross between Aunt Ada and Aunt Virgie, because that's what his mother looked like. So the dream was either, of course, I didn't know that it was, anything paranormal or supernatural going on. I thought my aunt had just taken me up to see a train wreck that had happened. And he explained to me that this train wreck took place before I was born. He said there hadn't been a train wreck since I was born in that area. So anyway, that was interesting and I enjoyed it. And I didn't even know it was paranormal. And had I not brought it up to my grandfather, which I wouldn't bring it up to anybody else, because anything unusual, they had had a fit about it. They just said, well, you're either delusional or you're imagining this or something's wrong with you. And I didn't want that type of attitude, where I know my grandfather wouldn't take that type of attitude with me. But anyway, that was something I feel was paranormal that somehow happened, and I didn't even know it was even paranormal. I thought it was just a natural thing. But I'm glad I found out before my grandfather died that the train wreck hadn't happened when I was 4 years old in 1962. It happened before I was born. And I'm glad that it was his mother, my great grandmother, who took me to see the train wreck. I'm just not sure how she did that. Whether somehow she did it by directly sending what she knew about the train wreck directly into my brain, like telepathically, and that would be a ghost or spirit communicating with me telepathically. And it's a possibility that somehow I was asleep and I dreamed it all, so that's one possibility. But they say that ghosts and spirits can come into your dreams while you're asleep. But to me, as a 4-year-old, I was wide awake, and she came into my room and wanted to know if I wanted to go to the train wreck. And I had tried talking to relatives they were talking about a train wreck. I always enjoyed listening to whatever the older people, the adults, were talking about. And I don't know why they were talking about a train wreck if one just didn't happen. But then they said, well, we don't want to talk about the train wreck to you because you're 4 and it'll scare you. So I was like disappointed. So I was so happy that at the time, I thought it was one of my aunts that came up and took me to the train wreck. That was a highlight of my younger years. Yet I didn't even know it was paranormal until my grandfather told me. And he passed away when I was 13. So this was kind of close to him passing away. So I was either almost 13, or actually 13. So that covers that. But my paranormal has always been primitive, and I pretty much kept it to myself because my family really, really just went overboard with telling the whole country that I was seeing and hearing things when I wasn't. I can't say I ever saw and heard a ghost when I was enjoying the um, thoughts and feelings from looking at that a decorative wood in my relative's house. And that relative that lived in the house later on was my Aunt Virgie and Aunt Ada. So, but anyway, I definitely saw someone when I experienced the situation where I thought it was my Aunt Virgie or my Aunt Ada taking me to the train wreck. So, but if it, let's say, benefit of the doubt that it is a delusion, most people who are delusional do not have positive delusions about things that they would like to experience or have seen. So, anyway, I dismiss that. I think it was highly paranormal, and paranormal in a very positive way.
And since that time, I mean, that's an amazing experience. As kind of with me, it started as a young age, and you start figuring out when you get older that it's more supernatural or paranormal once you begin to understand and start connecting the dots. And during those times, there's no real way, I guess, to invent. Not like today, we have internet, we have more access to information. Back then, it was a lot
Right.
harder. Prior to, well, before we get to that part, did you receive any more visitations during your life from these same entities, or were there other entities visiting you?
Well, the a couple times since that, um, when I was after I retired in 2016, January of 2017, in fact, January 1st, I was taken to the hospital. I had kidney failure, and while I was in the hospital with kidney failure, I had like a doppelganger situation where uh, my kidney doctor, she was a really, really nice and good doctor. She had came, she stayed out in the hall, but it was the ICU room that I was in, which was room 5, and all glass type walls in the ICU, very small rooms. And she said, "Good news." And I said, "What is the good news?" And she said, I had like bleeding above my esophagus from where I'd taken ibuprofen, copious amounts of ibuprofen, because I had knee and back injuries from the army, and I wanted to stay in and finish up enough to get enough years to get a retirement with the Army Reserves and also with the federal government. And so all this ibuprofen had laid in that area, and it had caused bleeding. And they had went in earlier and clamped it, but it never stopped. So that morning or that afternoon, they were going to take me back to surgery. And she had talked to me in the morning while standing out in the hallway, which was kind of unusual for her to. She always came into my room. So anyway, she just smiled and said the bleeding had stopped. And I said, "Okay, thank you." And I said, "Well, I don't have to go to surgery in the afternoon." So in the afternoon, the nurse came in and said, "Well, we're ready to take you down to surgery." And I said, "Well, you don't have to because the bleeding has stopped." And she just said, "Mr. Evans, you're your own worst enemy. You're probably going to die because the bleeding has not stopped." So I just said, "Well, I'm not going because I was told by my doctor the bleeding has stopped and there's no reason to go." So around 5 p.m., before they served supper, she came in and said, "I got lab results, and they say that your red blood cells are climbing, and that denotes the bleeding has stopped." So I had talked to I had that kidney doctor probably for 2 years after, 2 or 3 years after I got out of the hospital, And I asked her on one occasion, how did you know the bleeding had stopped? And she said, I had no way of knowing, and that wasn't me. She said she had never told me that. So I feel it was a ghost or, you know, spirit knew I trusted that doctor and I liked her, and that ghost of spirit doppelganged her image so they could give me news that I would trust. And it was good news because had they went back in and fooled with the clamp in that area, it might have started bleeding again. So, and I had no way of knowing other than the fact that someone who looked exactly like my kidney doctor told me. So that was kind of like a to me a paranormal doppelganger type experience where a ghost or spirit will actually manifest a image of a person that you trust so they can tell you something that you need to know that they hope you will take to heart and follow. And then also while I was in the hospital, um, when they transferred me from the uh, ICU to, um, it was like a part of a hospital within a hospital. It was another organization that rented space from the hospital. They had a hospice and they had a step above a hospice. And I was in the step above a hospice where most people passed away. But of course, I got better and left. And while I was in there, well, before I actually was transferred, two doctors who came into my room and told me I was going to die. It wasn't a kidney doctor, but it was two other doctors, which I won't say who. And I thought that was kind of cold hearted because an army medic, even if I knew someone was going to die, I wouldn't tell them. I don't think that's good because if a person trusts a doctor a lot, they'll just go downhill and give up. So anyway, I didn't give up. I just kind of got angry about that. So about my second or third day in this hospital within the hospital, after they transferred me, 10:30 at night. Well, 10:30 at night, while they were transferring me, a lady met us in the hallway and took the gurney from the ICU nurse. She just said, "Well, I know you all are busy in the ICU. I'll take him from here." So that lady took me to my room, uh, helped me get in the bed, took my vitals, and also took my uh, patient records because your hospital records get transferred with you from unit to unit. And then I went to sleep. I felt good. I can go to sleep because it was almost 11 o'clock after that nurse had left. And then another nurse came in my room and woke me up around 12 midnight and said, "Who are you and what are you doing in this bed?" Like she thought I was some type of homeless vagrant that had made my way into this hospital bed. And I told her, I said, "Well, the nurse brought me in here and told me this was my room and took my vitals." And she claimed no, nobody gave her any vitals for any patient in this room. And, I told her that, I, I'm here because I was brought here and my name is Keith Evans. And she went and checked and said, "Okay, there's supposed to be a Keith Evans in this room." She said, "How come nobody told me?" I said, I'm the patient. I'm in the room. And I didn't even, she said, "Well, why didn't you ring your call button?" And I said, "I can't even reach my call button from wherever I'm at." So anyway, she got me my call button and she said there was no one gave her any information on vital signs. So she took my vital signs again and then I was allowed to go back to sleep. But that lady who brought me to my room, I had not published my book yet. I didn't publish my first book, The Hayes House Ghost for People 2, until about August or September of 2018. And this lady knew about my book because I was telling most of the hospital people because I thought, you're in a hospital and you just well as talk about your book and make the best of it because I'm highly on promoting my book, probably go overboard with it to most people's standards. So anyway, I had mentioned my book to this young lady. She was about maybe in her 50s, gray hair, kind of short, who brought me into the room. And she told me she already knew about my book. And I thought about that. How could she know about my book? Because, I hadn't published it yet. That was January of 2017. I was working on it, and I probably mentioned it on well, at that time, I don't even know if I was on Instagram. I know I was on, pretty sure I was on Facebook, but I'm not sure. I may have not got on Facebook yet until maybe after Hurricane Michael. I knew I was on Facebook after that, but I'm not sure about before that. So I don't know how she could have known about my book, but she said she did. So, and she thought that my book, The Hayes House, was a really nice book. So anyway, that was kind of weird and strange. And I ended up seeing that lady one time. I was in that hospital, within the hospital for about 30 days. So uh, probably after 2 weeks, they were starting to let me walk one time in the hallway by myself with a walker. Well, it started out I had to be with somebody, and then they allowed me to just walk on my own. And one time when I was walking on my own, I saw that lady again. And I saw that lady, with elderly lady that was sitting in the wheelchair. She was pushing her. And I said hello to the elderly lady because I usually don't speak to someone without speaking to everybody. And she didn't answer me. And the lady said, well, she don't talk. So anyway, I saw her again. So I thought, well, if I'm seeing her again, she must be an employee. So anyway, after I saw her, I went over and this was near the nurses station. I went over and I talked to the nurses at the nurses station. And I said, that lady I was just talking to. And she said, well, what lady were you talking to? And I said, she's probably in her 50s and gray hair and, white nursing uniform. And they said, well, we don't have anyone that works in this department that fits that image. They had 3 nursing stations. So I figured, well, she must work at the furthest away nursing station because I only had energy enough to walk like halfway down the hall, which was the second nursing station. Counting where I was at was the first nursing station because my room shared the wall with the nursing station. So anyway, that nurse claimed that she never saw me talking to anyone. And she said there was no nurse that worked at, within the hospital, that fit that description. So that was the second nurse that said, the one that works here like that. She said, we're very small. We know everyone that works. It was almost like pre-hospice. And the insurance company would approve it for long-term care for people who, were having a hard time taking care of themselves. And after kidney failure, you're just very weak. And it's very hard to take care of yourself when you're that weak. So anyway, I think seeing that lady twice, that she may have not been, a flesh and blood nurse. There's a possibility she was some type of volunteer. I don't know. But so, and the next time that I had an experience was actually the second or third day that I was at this hospital within the hospital. And they had put me on a chemotherapy medicine. And they explained it to me this way. It was to stop my white blood cells from attacking my kidneys because they felt my kidneys were so badly damaged that my white blood cells were going to see them as not being my kidneys and try to attack them. So I was on this very strong chemotherapy, which throws you for a loop, definitely. Makes you very tired and very weak. And they told me, you can't have visitors with this strong medicine. And I said, okay, I'll let you know if anyone comes in. So as the nurse was walking out, she was a very high-strung, angry, type nurse. She was just ready to me, it seemed like she wanted to tear people apart. So as she walked out, this lady walked in. It was a lady, I could only explain her as maybe being maybe Native American, just by looks, which is, you know, I don't know. And she came in, she had like dark black hair, um, kind of looked like my Aunt Orvie in a way, heavier set, where my grandmother on my mother's side was kind of skinny, and my uncle on my mother's side was kind of slim. So Aunt Orby was the one that was kind of short and heavy. So this lady kind of looked like her, and she introduced herself. I don't remember her name, but I'm not good with names anyway. And she gave me a business card. And anyway, she told me that she thought I would make a full recovery. And she said, don't listen to anyone else that says otherwise. And she held my hand. And it was so nice to hear her say that. So nice to hear her say that you're going to make a full recovery, because I thought I would too. So anyway, she did hold my hand. I tried to shake her hand, but she just held my hand before she left, and her hand was warm. And then she went out of the room as that angry nurse, that was my nurse for at least 12 hours, was coming in. And my nurse said nothing to her. So I said nothing. I figured, well, the nurse sees her come in and sees her go out. It's definitely a situation where the nurse knows it's happening. So later on that day, I took a nap. And when I woke up, I couldn't find the business card. And I thought, did that angry nurse take my business card? Because I figured that lady was so nice. I wanted to stay in touch with her. So, I asked her, I said, the lady that came in this morning as you were going out, and then she went out again as you were coming in, she had given me a business card. And the nurse looked at me and said, nobody's come in and out of this room. And she says, there's not supposed to be anyone coming in and out. So I just let it go at that. So that might have been a ghost or a spirit, because usually when somebody is very positive with me, it's a ghost or a spirit. Because all my life, my family had run around talking about how, I was, and how paranormal was just a bunch of nonsense with a person that didn't have a correctly functioning brain, that everyone where I lived at in Maryland was just, going along with whatever, kind of going along to get along, I guess. And it wasn't true at all. So, you know, it was just so nice to have someone that saw things the way I saw it, like that woman who thought that I would get totally better, and I did. I recovered from everything. The bleeding stopped in my esophagus. I, I, the last time I went to the doctors less than 6 months ago, I had 45% functioning of both kidneys, and that's about the highest it's been since 2017. It usually stays around 30 to 33% functioning, and that's both kidneys combined. So I just I also had gangrene in two of my little toes on the left foot. It seems like whenever your kidneys fail, your body shuts down the blood to your distal ends, your brain, your fingers, and your toes, so that your body can force more blood to your already damaged kidneys that can't take it anymore. So
Wow,
anyway,
that sounds pretty awful.
but the gangrene did heal. In one of the toes that had
Good.
gangrene, I had a bone infection, and Blue Cross and Blue Shield was really good. They approved me to have hyperbaric chamber treatment to help heal the gangrene. That's where they increased the barometric pressure so that your body can absorb more oxygen so you can heal quicker. And after what happens to the tips of your toes that were involved with the gangrene, they actually just fall off. It might sound gross, but that's the process. And after that, one of the toes had bone infection. So I had to go every day for like 30 days to get an injection of a medication to heal the bone infection. And I could not take the strongest medication because the kidney doctor said it wasn't good for my kidneys. I got like one dose of that, and then they had to lower it to another dose. And when that happened, the doctor that was taking care of my I forget what that doctor's called, but taking care of the gangrene said that it was less effective and may not work, but it did. So I was very lucky that the Blue Cross and Blue Shield gave me all those opportunities, because otherwise I might have lost 1 or 2 feet. And it's great to keep what God gave you from the initial beginning.
Yes, absolutely. And the more you tell them these stories, the more I'm starting to think that these visitations maybe is their way to keeping you calm so you don't panic. When these things are happening to you, we tend to panic and really be low on ourselves. But it seems like they kept, for a lack of a better word, your spirits up because nobody else saw them, but they were talking to you. And it seems like you're talking about they're attracted to you because you're a very positive person. Maybe that's their purpose to keep you going in life. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It seems like there's some sort of evidence to that there. Now, in between all this that's going on, because you were in the service, you retired, you found time to become a paranormal investigator. Now, were you doing this also while you were in the service? Is this something that came out after you retired?
Well, I've always done paranormal investigating, even as a child, but I didn't tell anybody, I didn't advertise it, simply because most people were so negative
Mm.
about it. And but I used primitive methods. I didn't have any equipment until shortly before I retired. I guess I started using paranormal equipment. Probably the first piece I bought was either 2012 or 2013. And I think I had ordered a Obelisk first, and then second, I ordered a Melmeter. But I'm pretty sure I got the Melmeter before I got the Obelisk, because at that time, I think that they were out of Obelisks. I don't know if I ordered it directly from the maker, and whoever I ordered it from was waiting to receive them. So even though I ordered the Obelisk, at that time it was the Obelisk 4, I received the Melmeter first, and then after that I received the Obelisk 5B. And pretty much that's what I used, at least up until the hurricane hit in 2018. I think I had bought, of course, I had maybe 2 or 3 video cameras, and I had, a still camera, and I had bought, I think it was called a IDX or XDI, but it was supposed to be it was like a melt meter and a temperature reader, and it would print out. I never did it, but you could get it set up so you were supposed to print out. Like if you did a hour-long paranormal investigation, and if you got a word on the Obelisk 5, say at 2:05, and also at 2:05 you had a increase in cold temperature and an increase in you know the electromagnetic activity or energy, then they would pinpoint that. So, but I never did use that part of it, and all that got washed away during Hurricane Michael. And Hurricane Michael came probably a little over a year and a half after I had kidney failure. And I was actually really starting to feel really weak and tired again. And I was wondering if I was going to have a relapse of this kidney problem again. And when they told us to evacuate, I figured, well, I'm not going to evacuate. It's never really flooded here before. And I'm so tired, I don't feel like getting out there in the traffic and maybe get caught in a storm on a road where I don't even know if it's going to flood or not. So I didn't evacuate, but that was a mistake. I lost everything that I didn't own any real property, but I lost all my paranormal equipment, all the uh, all the videos and pictures of my thermal imager that I had during the uh, at least 2 year off and on investigations at the Hayes House for the book The Hayes House Ghosts Are People Too. All that was lost. And back then I had a more primitive type flare thermal imager, and that was lost during the storm. So, but during the storm, I was really happy that even though at one time the water was over my head when I was standing on the bathroom toilet, and I had to actually push up off the toilet, and my ceiling hit the top of my head, and I was able to get a
Oh,
gasp of air right as the water was underneath my chin. And then the bathroom
holy
door
crap.
broke out, and when that happened, the water level went down, and then the back door to the apartment broke out, and then the water level went down again, and then it never came up that high again. But when I was in there it was a fast moving storm. Thank God for that. Because after about an hour of that, I was getting cold. And I felt like Pat and Kathleen Hayes. They were the owners of the Hayes House from 1942. And Pat passed away in 1976. And Kathleen lived there until she went in an assisted care facility. She lived at the Hayes House until it was sold in 1996. So she had lived there over 40 years. So I really felt like they were there with me during the hurricane. And that really meant a lot to me. It's almost like you cared enough to write about our house, and we care enough to be with you during the hurricane. And that kind of had a calming effect on me because there was really nowhere to run. It was more or less to hunker down and just hope that the storm doesn't get to you where you're at. So, but I really feel that the storm helped me in the long run because it boosts my adrenaline. And when my adrenaline is boosted, I heal. So I don't think that, I hate to say it was playing that way, but in a way, I think it was playing that way so I could actually boost my healing. And, after that, I kept getting better, and I still feel better today. So some days I don't feel as good as others, but I think the adrenaline boost from Hurricane Michael helped boost my healing altogether after having kidney failure. So
Well, I mean,
I think it
you
was a
look great, my
positive
friend.
experience. What's that?
So I couldn't tell. You look great because I can't, if you were sick or anything like that, you can't tell. You look, I mean, it's a bright, sunny day where you're at. And so with going from all these paranormal experiences, and you had the experience with the storm, we've had some sort of a healing effect from that experience. Somewhere in between there, you became interested in the subject of vampires. So the first time I heard about your book, The Vampires That Are Alive, I'm thinking, I wonder if we're going to do like a vampire cult type deal. But we're talking about real flesh and blood vampires, correct?
Yes. And it started back when I was in middle school. There was a British sitcom that aired 4:30 when I lived in Maryland, and it was only on for 30 minutes each day, Monday through Friday. And there was a character on there called Barnabas Collins, and he was a vampire, and he was like my childhood hero. So I had always admired him, and thought about, wow, that'd be great to have some of those abilities and be a vampire. And I was always trying to figure out, things like how could a vampire shapeshift from one animal to another, or from a human to, say, a bat. And in my book, I give details theoretically on how I think that can happen, and also how can a vampire, you know, shapeshift from being a human to just dematerializing. So, and I think a lot of it has to do with somehow they've harnessed a large amount of energy, whether it be a black hole or magnified ley lines of the Earth, so that they can bend space and time just for them physically and go back to a time that they were actually within a bat's body, or to a time where they only existed as a spirit, which is like electromagnetic energy, if you're a ghost or a spirit. So somehow they must have a small black hole where they can localize and only bend space and time for their physical being. And I think all of us are reincarnated over and over again. And I think we can go into a body of an animal or insect, or maybe stay a spirit for a while. So I think if you had been, if you're a vampire who has harnessed this technology or this energy that allows you to bend space or time, I think you can instantaneously go back to any previous life form that you have been within the past. So that's all within my book, and I handle just about every chapter covers a traditional characteristic of a vampire. Anything from why don't vampires have a mirror image, and why don't vampires age, and why are vampires sensitive to sunlight, and I do my best theoretically to explain why. And I cover a range of genetics, biology, physics, astrophysics, in attempting to explain why a vampire do what they do and how they're utilizing these abilities. I try to explain that. So I think I do a pretty good job. And if anyone likes science or likes to understand how a vampire functions and works, I think they'll really love my book. And my book is short, it's less than 50 pages, but there's no fluff. I've read books before, and you read maybe 19 pages to get to that last page to get that one piece of information that you wanted and needed. And my book, there's no fluff in it. It's mainly just the meat and potatoes of how a vampire, a certain characteristic, and how that vampire can utilize that characteristic. So how a vampire can do what a vampire does. And most human beings can't do what vampires do. Most human beings are just we certainly can't shapeshift. We can't dematerialize. Um, we certainly, most of us don't have telepathic abilities. If we do, we're not aware of it. So I attempt to explain all the traditional characteristics of a vampire, and each chapter is a different characteristic. So if you read it, most people who have read it said it just kind of blows their mind. They said, well, I would have never thought that, and I knew the vampires had that characteristic, but I never looked at it in that way. So most people seem to, it's just kind of mind boggling, and really causes them to think. So if you're the type of person that likes to keep within your safe zone, don't read my book, because it's going to take you outside of that safe zone. And if you're a person that scares easy, don't read my book, because you might look in the mirror and say, oh my God, I have some vampire traits. Because I feel that over the years, vampires, I think they probably came from another civilization, not from Earth. I don't even think human beings came from Earth. I think we probably came from someplace else Otherwise, we wouldn't get suntans and sunburns when we go out in the sun. No other animal here does that. So anyway, I really feel that
I never thought
vampires
about that.
probably are extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
So,
What's interesting,
and
not to
they
interrupt you,
might have been here for years
but I
too.
never.
And they go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I never really thought about the whole sunburn thing because I don't think I know of any animal that can get sunburn other than human.
And then vampires cannot be out in direct sunlight at all. So my theory is that they are extraterrestrial. They came from a planet that either had a white dwarf or a blue dwarf star, which if they did and they were in that star's Goldilocks zone, that star would have been no brighter during the day than our moon is to us at night. And theoretically, I think what vampires do when they're exposed to direct sunlight is that it denatures their DNA. And denature is to de-ravel it and destroy their DNA. So I think over the years, vampires were close enough to humans to interbreed. And by interbreeding, that allowed them to be more exposed to sunlight and things like that. So if you look in the mirror, you may say, "Oh my God, I'm part vampire." And I think all of us are. I think there's a little bit of vampire in every person.
And that doesn't surprise me in the least because if you're, and I don't know what kind of background you come from a religious standpoint, but we all have some certain DNA that comes from somewhere else. If you
Yeah.
subscribe to the theory of when, if you go to Genesis 6:8, when the angels left their first estate and they lusted after human women and took them wives, and then they interbreeded with them because apparently their genetics are able to pass on to human. And then they, well, unfortunately, have these hybrid children were pretty awful, turn into giants or Nephilim, whatever you call them. But there is something to that because if we're going
Yeah.
to connect these, I believe there is some extraterrestrial interference there of some sort.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, vampires, we only know life as it is here on Earth. On other planets, vampires might be the life, and it might be very normal. And if we were vampires and we only drank blood, we'd never have to kill another animal. We just would not have, we would have to be very careful not to overdrink their blood. So, if an animal don't have enough blood to circulate oxygen to all parts of its body, it will pass away. So if we're very careful and only drink a certain amount of blood so that that animal can replenish it, we would never have to kill another animal to eat if that's all we drank were blood. But genetic wise, within my one chapter, I think it's the first chapter of my book, vampire bats have lost, I guess you could say, amino acids within their DNA strain or strands, which allow them to drink blood. And blood is not that nutritious. So vampire bats have to drink often, otherwise, they will just starve to death. So you got to take that in consideration also. Um, but anyway, if you like genetics, I at least have one chapter on genetics, and
No, and that's, I think
I've looked at
that's very important to have that part.
I looked at research that was done on vampire bats in I think it was either South or Central America. Vampire bats that had lived in a cave, and they had done research to do DNA sequencing on these bats, and they compared the DNA sequencing to bats that weren't vampire bats to see what the difference in the sequences were. And in most cases, the vampire bats were missing at least one amino acid from their different chains of DNA. So that was pretty cool. And that might be the only
I mean,
difference
that sounds,
between us and a vampire.
And it could be so with the modern vampire. If we could just forget the what we've learned so far, I said earlier from television, Hollywood, graphic novels, books, what have you. The modern vampire in this present time, are they still feed on blood or is it energy they're feeding on? Do they even need us for that anymore?
Well, I've heard of the psychic vampires and stuff like that. I didn't write about that in my book because a lot of times I think that's more an abusive person that just wants to control other people. And if you can control other people, it's power. And whatever way you can control them, you're going to be more powerful if you can get other people to do the things you don't want to do and get them to go along with you. So I didn't cover that because I think that's more probably for a book about psychology uh, and manipulation of others or a personality defect. So I didn't cover that in my book at all.
And that's fair enough because that's a whole different, I guess, discipline to look into or research. And now, with for the listeners of Let's Find Out that want to learn more about your book and where they can get it, where can they go find this book?
Well, my book, the paperback, both The Hayes House Ghost or People 2 and, well, hold it. I did get my final royalty. So the Hayes House Ghost or People 2 is only available now ebook on Kindle. But the my newest book, Vampires Dead or Alive, is available paperback on Amazon, and Amazon will let other good book carriers carry the book. I don't know how many are, so if you prefer another carrier of book online other than Amazon, check it out first and see. They might carry it. I would still get my royalties through Amazon. And also, Vampires Dead or Alive is available on Kindle. And I have a YouTube channel. It's called Paranormal Short Sessions by Keith Evans, where I show unedited, usually no more than 15 to 30-minute paranormal short sessions. And I also show the promos. I use the promos to advertise my YouTube channel on Instagram and Facebook. And most of the promos could go over a minute, but Instagram and Facebook will cut my promo off after a minute. So if you want to see the entirety of my promos, especially if I'm getting good data, I continue on. I don't just cut it off because Instagram and Facebook only wants 30 seconds or 60 seconds. So go on to my YouTube channel, Paranormal Short Sessions by Keith Evans, to see the entirety of all my promos. I've been putting the promos on for just about maybe a little over a year now because some people enjoy watching the promos because they're short and sweet. But anyway, most of my paranormal is positive. I have very little negative. So if you enjoy the positive, the good ghost and spirit type situation, check out my Paranormal Short Sessions by Keith Evans. So, and I appreciate you having me on. This has been great.
Oh, it has been. I'll put all the links to your YouTube and for Amazon to where to learn more about your book. But before we go, because I know we're coming up against the clock, real quick, for those that have had experiences like you, like myself, and people, I'll say in our community, real quick, let me ask the question better. How can we know if we ever come in contact with a vampire?
Well, I'm not sure if you would know because if a vampire has interbreeded with humans, they might only have certain characteristics, and that they might not have every characteristic. And I'm not sure every vampire has the ability to do everything that other vampires can do. Uh, do I have time to talk about a situation that happened where I might have I don't know for sure, but I might have ran into a vampire one time. Do I have about 3 or 4 minutes?
Of course, we make the rules. Let's do
Okay.
it.
Well, I was doing paranormal research at the 1880 in St. Augustine, Florida, and I had talked to the gentleman a couple years earlier, and he had a 3-story Victorian townhouse that was built in 1883, and he was renting it out for vacationers. Had 3 apartments, actually built on the back, which isn't original, so there was 4 apartments, and he wanted me to do paranormal research, but I thought it wasn't big enough. It wasn't like your large Victorian home that's you know 12 rooms or 18 rooms. But then I thought about it and I thought, I it's old. I should do paranormal research there. So I decided to call him right during in Florida when they were right before they did the shutdown for COVID in early 2020. And I called him and he said, sure, come on down. And I went down there for 2 months and I did paranormal research. And the first week, all the streets of St. Augustine were just empty. And it's kind of like downtown St. Augustine where the group is always walking from early morning until, about 10 o'clock, maybe 11 o'clock at night. So the streets were just totally empty, which was kind of eerie to say the least. And I was getting some really good paranormal research that first week. It was almost like the ghosts and spirits knew there was a problem. And it was almost like it had stirred them up also. And during that period of time, the owner had came down to visit the 1880 Victorian there in St. Augustine 3 times. And he came down the weekend of the first full week I was there. And I know he had a daughter and a son. And his daughter was with him because I saw her. And his daughter, his wife, his sister, and him. There was 4 of them that would get out of the car because there was nobody around. So when they got out, you were looking out to say, who's out there? And it was him. And the second week he came, they were sitting on the second time during my 2-month period that they visited for the weekend. I walk twice a day because of my circulation. It helps it. And I had just got back from walking, and they were sitting on the porch, and he introduced his sister. There was like 4 rocking chairs on the first floor front porch of the 1880 Victorian. He introduced his sister, introduced his wife, introduced himself, but he didn't introduce the young lady sitting there. And he invited me to sit down, and I didn't want to sit down and take the young lady's chair. So anyway, it was kind of weird because I looked at the young lady and I said, are you still in school? Because I figured, well, she's probably his daughter and she's either high school or college. And then I was even more baffled. He answered me and said, no, I'm finished with school a long time ago. So anyway, I went on inside because I didn't want the young lady to have to get up from her chair. And later on, I found out from him that the third time they visited, which was closer to the end of my 2-month period, he had another young lady with him. And I looked at him, I said, I didn't know you had 2 daughters. And he said, I don't. And I said, who was that first young lady with you the first 2 times? Because she wasn't with him that time. He said, there was no young lady with me. So I had seen that young lady. The second time he left on a Monday morning. And he said, well, Keith, we're going to be leaving early Monday morning so you can do paranormal research in the 2nd or 3rd floor apartment. And we're going to leave early. So when I got up that morning, after they told me they were going to be leaving early, I had all my paranormal equipment ready to go. And I had heard knocks on the wall on the outside of my room, which went into the stairway, but I had never really checked. And I heard a knock, and I opened the door up really quick, and it was his daughter. well, at least who I thought was his daughter at the time. I didn't know that he didn't have a daughter until the third time they had visited. This was at the end of the second time that he had visited while I was there for the 2-month period at the 1880 Victorian in St. Augustine. So anyway, I asked her, I said, was that you knock on the wall? And she said, yeah, she got something out of, they had like jars along the wall that were filled with different things like brochures and all. And if you took a brochure out, then the vase or little jar would knock against the wall. So I thought, well, that sounds legitimate because I've taken things out, brochures out, and it did tap against the wall. So anyway, I asked her, I said, well, your father said everybody was going to be going home this morning early. And I said, you're still here. And she said, yeah, I'll be leaving either later on tonight or tomorrow morning. And I thought, oh man, I'm not going to be able to do paranormal research then, because she had clothes all over the place, all over the floor. And I figured, well, if she's doing laundry, she's going to be going up and down the stairs, and it's just going to be too much distraction. I won't be able to do paranormal research in the second or third floor apartment because you'll be able to hear the stairs. If someone walked up and down, you could definitely hear it. And I couldn't do paranormal research in the stairway because that would be even closer to the noise. So I went back in and didn't get to do paranormal research until later. But she had said something about she was having problems sorting her clothes. And I said, well, I just throw them all in and wash them together. And she laughed. And I said, well, since you're the owner's daughter, I said, having someone that's been here a while might be a good trigger object to have you do paranormal research with me. So I asked her, do you want to do paranormal research with me? And I figured that'd be one way to keep her quiet and not walking up down the stairs, and I could get maybe an hour of paranormal research in. And she just didn't want any parts of that. So anyway, I went on back in my apartment, and I figured, well, it just, I have to wait it out until she's done doing laundry, and then find out whether she's in the second or third floor apartment and do the apartment that's empty. And about an hour later, I thought, I haven't heard the washing machine or the dryer going, and I haven't heard anyone going up and down the steps. So I opened the door and looked out. No clothes on the, hallway floor. The washing machine was empty. The dryer was empty. The dryer was even cool, like it hadn't been used for a while. So I thought, well, that was awful fast that she got done. So I walked up the steps and I knocked on the second floor apartment. I wanted to see if she was still there. Got no answer. I said, it's Keith, I'm coming in. So I opened up the door. Nobody in there. Totally empty. No clothes. She had already left. And I thought, well, maybe she's on the third floor. So I went up to the third floor apartment, the same situation. Knocked, said who I was. Nobody came to the door. Door was unlocked. Place was empty. So I thought, well, how did she get her stuff and leave without making noise coming down the steps? I'm hard of hearing from the Army, but I can still hear people go down those steps. It echoes, it's loud and clear. And so anyway, I have a feeling, since nobody else could see her, and I had up to a year to interview family members and talk to the different family members about, did you see the lady sitting there in the chair when the owner asked me to sit down in the chair? And they said, nope, there was no lady there. It was just three of us. And I talked to other family members who had said they had seen people momentarily within the 1880, but it was usually men, and only there was a couple sightings by two different family members, because it was like a family owned and operated type Airbnb. So they had said, yep, they had seen a man in the hallway, and when they went out to investigate, he was gone, and he couldn't have, he just couldn't went down 3 stories that fast. So there have been other sightings of people in there, and I just felt that she had somehow used telepathic means to communicate with me, so I would see her visually and hear her auto wise. I don't think I'm pronouncing it right. I would hear her audibly, and nobody else could. So to me, that was one characteristic of a vampire. I'm not saying that she is or was a vampire. I'm just saying that she was able to communicate telepathically to me. But also, ghosts and spirits have been known to be able to communicate with you telepathically. I had asked her at one point if her name was Margaret, because she looked like a younger version of a mother ghost and spirit that I had had a dream about after I had visited her house in Apalachicola. And I had went to her house in attempts to get to know the owner and get permission to do paranormal research there. So I asked this young lady if her name was Margaret, and she said, "How'd you know what my name was?" And anyway, this young lady had like dark brown or black, kind of like tight curly hair, and she had really pale skin. And in Florida, people with pale skin either get a sunburn or get a suntan really fast. So that was very unusual. That was other characteristics that might lean towards her being a vampire. And secondly, to the, you know, communicating with me telepathically. So anyway, I always wanted to write a book. I got permission to write a book about the 1880 Victorian, but I need to go back and attempt to do some more paranormal research just to see if I see this young lady again. And then I want to try to set up infrared camera. I have an infrared camera and a thermal camera to see if she's not on a regular camera, to see if I can pick her up in any other way. And if I can't, then she's dealing with me telepathically. So anyway, I think it was probably Margaret um, from Margaret Key from Apalachicola. And Margaret Key was a writer. She was married to a gentleman who had written a couple books that were fairly successful. And she had written for like a magazine for years. And after I had visited her house the first time, which the new owner invited me in and showed me the first floor. And I had, at that time, I was living in Texas, and I went back home to Texas. And I think the next weekend I had a dream about her. And I was in an old house, almost like with a salesperson, like they were trying to show me the house and sell me the house. And I heard a lady crying. And I went out in the hall. It seemed like the salesperson wasn't concerned about it, but I went out in the hall by myself, and this little old frail lady walked up the steps. And that little old frail lady had the same facial features as the young lady that I saw at the 1880 Victorian, except she was probably in her 70s or 80s with gray hair. And she looked in the mirror at the top of the stairs, and she was crying. And I went over and hugged her. I just felt so sorry for her. And she just said, "I mustn't." And that was the only thing she said to me. "I must not," or "I mustn't." And I had asked different people after that happened, did Margaret Key have any type of mirror at the top of her hall? And I went into this one restaurant, and I talked to a lady and asked her if she knew Margaret Key, and she said, "Yes, I used to clean Margaret Key's large, beautiful house at least once a month or once a week." And I said, "Well, did she have a large mirror at the top of the stairway. And she looked at me and her mouth dropped and she said, "How would you know? Were you in her house?" And I said, "No, I had a dream about it. And I just wondered if the dream was true." And she said there was a mirror, but she says it wasn't where you say it was in the dream. So anyway, but she told me the story about that mirror. That mirror, when she passed away, her next door neighbor came in and helped himself to the mirror and took it. And apparently, her next door neighbor is an antique person in Apalachicola. And I had a chance to talk to him about that mirror. I was really civil and nice. And I just told him, I asked him, I said, "Would you ever consider giving that mirror back and let it stay in Margaret Key's house?" And he said, "No, that was my mirror. I had gave it to her to borrow." He said, "I'm not putting it back in that house." So then I just left. But at least I approached him on it. So the dream had connections with at least two people that were very real. And when I left, when I first visited her house and the new owner was there and he had showed me around the first floor, it had original wood ceiling, walls, and floor. And he had showed me around on the first floor. When I left, I was using a rental car from the airport. And when I got back into my car, it indicated that the passenger seat belt needed to be buckled because there was weight or something on that side. And at that point, I figured it was Margaret. And I had said, "Margaret, I'm, going to be leaving town." So I think I don't know if I buckled the seatbelt or not. I don't think I did. But I told Margaret I was going to be leaving town. So as I got out of maybe 3 or 4 miles out of Apalachicola from where she lived on 13th Street, the seatbelt, need buckling light went off on the rental car. But I told her, "I'm leaving. I'm not going back to Apalachicola. So if you don't get out now, you'll be at the airport with me." So anyway, and shortly after that, it had to be that next weekend, which would have been maybe I'd went on the weekend. So if I came back on a Sunday, it was probably either Friday night, early Saturday morning, or the next day or next night that I dreamed about her mirror. And it actually, there's truth about there being a mirror. And somehow I guess she wanted me to approach the gentleman and say something to him, and I did. So that was interesting. And I think most of that was paranormal. So as a paranormal investigator, paranormal will knock on your door, whether you're doing paranormal research or not. So
No, and that kind of helps answer a lot of questions. And I think that this is going to be one of many more times you'll be having experiences. And I think that you probably have a few more books to write. And if you do, even if you have more experiences in your investigations, I would love to have you back on the show to discuss them. And you're going to be bringing an awful lot of new information to us.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure being on, and hope people will enjoy reading my new paperback book, Vampires That Are Alive. I think it will blow their mind. They'll find it intriguing. It's not going to be a boring book. It's going to be a book that makes you think about stuff, especially vampires.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend.
Let's find out with Diego, the power of Diego Mania. All content for Let's Find Out is property of co-host Diego and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, co-host Diego, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.